Bill DeGraf, Colonel Infantry. I grew up in the days of the National Guard. My dad was a member of the National Guard for many years. I could field strip the M1 rifle before the regular Army even had one because the Guard got it. So I grew up in kind of a military background, or a semi-military background. And I learned about West Point when I was about 10, I guess, and from then on, that's all I wanted. And I learned to play with lead soldiers, learn how to get an approach march, all this sort of stuff. So I just always wanted to be a soldier. Nothing else really interested me. I joined the ROTC, junior ROTC in San Francisco, because I wanted the background. I was 15. But I'd been out watering the garden, and I came in, my father said, they just bombed Pearl Harbor. Interestingly, my father commanded a state guard company. He was the first unit called to active duty. He was guarding the Golden Gate Bridge that night. And I didn't see him for a month. But it did. It solidified people. A lot of people who would never have supported war now were anxious to get it on. We only had one vote in Congress against it, Rankin. 2 voted against World War I, for that matter. Well, I graduated on the 6th of June in 1950. Korean War began on about the 20th of June, 1950. My wife and I had orders to go to Japan. Hers got canceled, mine hadn't. By the end of August, I was in the Korean War and spent a year over there. The first year of my marriage, I was there and she was home. Yeah, and I was just an infantryman, went over and got to fire the recoilless rifles, the mortars, all that sort of stuff. I was a heavy weapons company. I was down in the Pusan Perimeter, and about the 19th of September, we broke out of that, went up, and just went north. And I got within 15 miles of the Yalu River, and the Chinese decided that they didn't like us up there, too close to their dams. So we went back down. And it was the forgotten war. It was a little war stuck off in the corner of Asia. It was an intent to keep the communist forces from taking over all of Korea, which would have threatened Japan. And, from a political standpoint, it was important. But most people did ask them where Korea was, they couldn't tell you where it was. Of course, it's an interesting set of circumstances. World War II, everybody loved you. When I was an enlisted man in the fall of 43, the early 44 in California, you couldn't walk down the street without people saying, "Can I give you a lift someplace?" Or "Come have dinner." You had the stage door, canteen, the USO, all that sort of thing. Korean War, they were sort of indifferent. It was the forgotten war. But then didn't make much difference to me. I had got assigned a place in California. We had my job and enjoyed that. Vietnam War, of course, it was the unliked war. But I never was in a position where I wouldn't wear a uniform. I was proud of that uniform, and I felt it was important. I never had people outright insult me or spit on me or that sort of thing, although there were people that did, I'm sure. But it's the interesting difference. And of course, today, the armed forces are very much in vogue, as it were. I wear my combat badge. It's surprising the number, excuse me, the number of people who mention it and say thank you.
What was the experience of you coming back home each time to America? What was the experience like? What did you receive?
Well, of course, I hadn't seen my bride for almost a year, so I was anxious to see her. It was just very pleased to be home and be here whole and have my family. And the time I went to the Vietnam War, the Korean War, that was the Korean War. World War II wasn't particularly much. The war had ended in May, and I came home in August. War in Europe ended in May. And I went out to see my family, this sort of thing. From Vietnam, of course, a little different because I had 4 children. They were all back here. I was anxious to get back to them. Mostly it was homecoming.
Would you do this over again? Would you sign up? Would you?
Oh, sure. I loved the Army. My wife loved being an Army wife. My children, though none of them would be good soldiers, in fact, but they all enjoyed being Army brats. And they call me every Armistice Day and say thank you, this sort of thing. No, and it's a family, particularly the West Point class you're very close to. But even so, around here, there are all kinds of soldiers. You met my next door neighbor, Julius Beckton, who enlisted shortly after I did. He's about 2 months younger than I am. But we have a bond. He was an infantryman for a while. We went through the same wars, this sort of thing. We have a bond there. A lot of people have bonds here. Oh, I didn't know him before he came here. We automatically have a link. And this is one thing that's nice about living here at the Fairfax, because it's full of those kind of people. But it's true in a lot of other things. That's why people join American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars and such, get together with people like mine.
When did you retire from the military?
I left in August of '74.
And what did you do afterwards?
I joined Science Applications, and a year or so after that, managed to get interested in the National Training Center out in California. So I feel a great attachment there. I kind of was the spark that made it go. I read the original contract for it, and I spent a lot of time at Fort Irwin trying to get the place going, and it's been very successful. It's saved a lot of lives, I think, training the people.
What are your thoughts on current military men and women in the current service?
Well, I think you have some of the finest soldiers you can imagine today. They're all volunteers, men, women, and I'm glad to see so many women in the service. They do a great job. We have a lot of women now at West Point. When I was there, women came up from New York City to the dances, and that was about it. Now about 18% of the cadets are women. A year ago, we graduated a woman first captain who is just outstanding. She's currently a Rhodes Scholar. She's finished up first in the French Special Services School. And that's the kind of person we get. Of course, that's most outstanding, but that's the kind of people we're getting at West Point, but as enlisted personnel or ROTC, the men the same way. Having volunteers is much different than the draftees we had in World War II, Vietnam, Korea. We got a different aspect. In Korea, when I was a battalion commander, 1956, no, 66. Anyway, 1966, I had a battalion. My platoon leaders were all draftees who'd had a year or so of college and were sergeants instead of lieutenants, because we had high-quality draftees. But they weren't dedicated. They didn't have the dedication you've got in a soldier today. And the same's true of the Air Force, the Navy. Marine Corps, Coast Guard. It's one big family.